Oh, that's smart, Sean.
All right, welcome to the second episode of MiraCosta Ask A Scientist. We have the pleasure of having Professor Jeffries-El, Malika with us. And I want to acknowledge Anne and Helen Free Foundation. It was through their endeavor that we were able to get introduced to Professor Malika. And I will let my dear colleague, Nina Lovejoy, one of our distinguished professor of business administration and marketing, to do the formal introduction of our wonderful guest today.
Thank you, Sean. So I had the privilege of meeting Dr. Jeffries-El a couple months ago while she was giving a lecture, and I was so impressed by her academic research, but also her work as a champion for women of color in STEM professions. Dr. Jeffries-El is a native of Brooklyn, New York. She received bachelor's degrees in chemistry and Africana studies at Wellesley College, and her master's and doctorate degrees in chemistry from George Washington University. After spending a year at Smith College as a Mendenhall Fellow, she worked as a postdoc researcher in the lab of Professor Richard McCullough at Carnegie Mellon University. In 2005, she joined the faculty in the chemistry department at Iowa State University and was promoted to associate professor with tenure in 2012. Dr. Jeffries-El was a Martin Luther King Jr. visiting professor in chemistry at MIT in 2015. The following year, she joined the Department of Chemistry and Division of Materials Science at Boston University. Since July 2020, she has served as the Associate Dean of BU's Graduate School in Arts and Sciences. Her scientific research focuses on the development of organic semiconductors, materials that combine the processing properties of polymers with the electronic properties of semiconductors. She's authored over 40 publications, received over 3,700 citations, and given over 100 lectures, both domestically and abroad. She's won numerous awards and is currently an associate editor for the Journal of Materials Chemistry. Professor Jeffries-El is a staunch advocate for diversity and dedicated volunteer, serving on the advisory board for the American Chemical Society's Women Chemists of Color Initiative and their Women Chemists Committee. We are so pleased to have Dr. Malika Jeffries-El join us for MiraCosta College's Ask a Scientist series. Welcome, Dr. Jeffries-El.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here, and I'm excited to have the opportunity to speak to your students. They sound like my people.
Yep. Dr. Jeffries-El, is it okay if I call you Dr. Malika?
That's fine too.
So I shared a list of questions that a student shared with us. Let me do a screen share with you so you can see what they sent to us. We try to organize all the questions, so we include all the questions students shared. And I think we have around 9 questions that we would like to have a conversation with you.
Okay.
And what's the meaning of Malika? I know it has a couple of different meanings.
It has a couple of different meanings, absolutely. When you asked if you could call me Dr. Malika, I chuckled because a lot of my international students actually call me Dr. Malika because I know it's very popular in other parts of the world like India, in the Middle East. It's a popular name. It does have, my dad actually got it from the Quran. So my dad was a practicing Muslim and he did get the name from the Quran. And I believe in Arabic, it means queen.
Yes.
So.
Yes, and a different pronunciation of it means angel.
Angel, does that also have the H at the end, like Malika?
Yes.
Yes, I met somebody with that name, and we had a dialogue around that. So yeah.
Wonderful. So the first question students shared: who is Malika Jeffries-El today? How did a young girl from Brooklyn, New York, manage to get where you are?
I saw that question on the sheet and I just love it because that is the question I kind of ask myself when I wake up every day. It's like, what is a girl like you doing in a place like this? You know, the unlikely circumstances that led to, you know, a little Black girl from Brooklyn, New York, from one of the most notorious housing developments in Brooklyn, New York at the time in the 90s, to now becoming a statistical aberration and being a tenured chemistry professor. It was a windy path. It was a challenging path, but it was a very rewarding path. And I don't want to give the quote to the wrong person, but I know I heard at least Oprah say it. This is opportunity was when fate and hard work meet. And it all began with just doing the work. I was always a good student. I was interested in science. I was interested in learning more, and I put my head in the books and went for it. I did get a nice healthy push from my mother, who, being the adult in the situation, could survey our circumstances and acknowledge that her limited education was probably a factor in our financial circumstances. So she pushed her children to do well at school. She basically like, the only way out of this hood is if you do well in school. My dad would, comment and say, there's no money in this house for college. You better convince somebody to give you a scholarship. And so those were kind of the backdrop, to my life as I made my, way through my schooling, but all the while knowing my dad was also very interested in sports, which is a love I picked up from him. So I kind of played both sides, was working toward the middle. I was also an athlete. And then I was also working being a scholar, thinking, okay, statistically, someone's either going to give me an athletic scholarship or an academic scholarship, but this is how I'm going to do it. But, that's kind of was always in the backdrop of my brain as a, probably in a way it shouldn't have been for such a young person to be worried about these things. But, I enjoyed school, so it never felt like work, but I always just, pushing through school, trying to excel in my academics. When I got exposed to science, which was important, early exposure to science, when I got exposed to science, that's when I realized that science was actually where I belonged. And so I stayed that course, but I just pushed through the academics, but it's almost like it evolves. And I think this generation could probably, think about it as some of these video games, you guys' video games that you get. I still love video games, but they're so much more, they have so much more intricate now than they used to be when I was a kid. But you almost have to beat one scene and then the next scene is revealed. Like you have to beat one level and then the next level is revealed to you. And that's kind of how my life went. So all as a young person, it was just like, I got to beat this level of get to college. That was like level one, get through high school, get a scholarship, get to college. And then when that happened, it was like, I couldn't see past that. It was just like, okay, get to college, check. But then when I got into college, then it became, I started to see the picture of what was involved in college and what opportunities existed for me, at that space and what I needed to do to excel there. And as I made my way through that space and started to clear that hurdle, you get the clues as to what's coming next. I was directed toward graduate education by some very solid undergraduate advising who steered me toward graduate education. And then again, level up. And I got to the next level. And it was just like, and only then when I started to do my PhD that I start to think about what my career would be, because that clearly was the end of the education game. You hide in school forever. I remember I had a young nephew who I went to his kindergarten graduation and he said, Auntie, how are you still in school? What grade are you? And I started to count and we figured out I was like in 23rd grade or something, and, but you realize you have to leave school and you have to land somewhere. And so then I started to contemplate my future. And that was kind of like the first fork in the road, industry or academia. So that became like the first fork in the road. But then you start to go down the academic path and realize it's got some twists and turns too. Do you want to go to a liberal arts college? You want to teach at a community college? You want to go to a large research institution? What do you want to do? And so I had to make my way through that. But yeah, it's really kind of cool. It's almost like you can, your sight line, you can't really see that far ahead, but each step you get in, then you can see a little further out. And that's okay. Just try, get on the path and keep going. And then I became a professor and all the things that came with that, a lot of which I didn't contemplate till I got going. I mean, I knew I would do research, write grants, write papers, teach students. That's what I knew I had to do. But, my passions popped up because I became fascinated with the fact, like, why are there not more people here like me? And to start to do that type of work. And then that opened up all kinds of opportunities. And then now recently I became an associate dean. And if you ask me when I first became a professor, did I think I would become it wasn't even on my to-do list to go into the administration. But as I made my way through the professoriate, I started thinking, oh, well, I actually am suited for administration. Why not do it? And, I got to finish this level. I don't know what's next. I'm sure there's a level up beyond this one. I can't, the path hasn't been revealed to me yet. I haven't moved through this level far enough to see what's next.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. There's so much into your life experience. I'm going to get to the student question, but I have so many questions. But let's get to it. So the second question a student had, let me share it with you. So. As a woman of color in chemistry, what were some of the obstacles you faced while getting your higher education, while conducting groundbreaking research, while switching universities, and now becoming associate dean?
Mm-hmm. There were a lot of obstacles, and so I'll start with the first part. I think one of the things that I benefited from that's not going to be true of this generation is the internet was just starting to become a thing when I was in school. And people say, why would you benefit from that? The internet gives us so many things. It does, but it was almost like the absence of information. What I didn't know didn't hinder me. I had no idea that science was as undiverse as it is. I knew from my school that there were only 2 African-American women who were my major in my university, but I just thought I went to the wrong school. I was like, oh, I went to, a PWI, and, I'm sure at the minority serving schools, there's tons of other, Black and brown scientists. I'm just at the wrong school. And it wasn't until I got further along that I was like, wait, reinforcements aren't coming. And then, the internet starts to become a thing. You can really look up things very easily and see data and see what the statistics were on that. I don't know how that would have affected me if I actually knew how daunting it was when I began. By the time I figured it out, I was too far along to stop. I think some of the obstacles I face are, intrinsic bias is probably the worst one that you face. Just this experience of being second guessed when you come in the room, and and it's one of these things that's just it's hard to shake. It's hard to shake because racist, bigoted, and biased people are going to have that effect. They're going to think the worst of you no matter what. But then on the flip side is that well-intentioned liberals often do the most damage because the racist, bigoted, and biased people point to their policies. Oh, this was a diversity hire. This was an affirmative action admit. And even when you actually are good enough to get in through standard channels, no one ever thinks you did. And so this is kind of the dichotomy that you have to deal with. Othering. I was having a conversation with a colleague of mine about othering, and I said just this feeling that of noticing that the whole system was not built for your inclusion. Whether it be from I remember when I was an undergraduate, I was absolutely the best student in my organic chemistry class, and I didn't have anyone who wanted to study with me because all the other girls had formed their little cliques, and I was guilty of being an underclassman. I was one of the younger students in the class, and I was a woman of color, and so all of my majority older classmates had formed their little bonds and friendships. And even I remember seeing a group studying in my own dorm living room, and I saw them from the class. I was like, oh, hey, you guys are in, Professor Stanley, are you guys doing OChem? You want to study? We've been studying together for years and we don't need any new additions. And, just being left out. So I actually used to study by myself for organic. And I used to meet up with one of the lab instructors to run questions by him and to study with him. He was kind of my buddy and was willing to help me. But it was just kind of like, wow, this always this feeling that you're not part of the pack. And that's sometimes difficult to shake. How I've navigated that is I've kind of formed my own support systems. Even when I got to graduate school, it kind of continued. Not always feeling in, not belonging. And people say, how do you survive that? Well, I had my whole other community outside of school. I had a whole set of friends. I had family that was close by. And that was my social activities. That was outside of the community. I didn't do as much socialization. I had a few friends in graduate school, but I didn't do as much. That wasn't like the way most graduate students kind of make that their whole nexus, that world. That was just one piece. I had a whole other life outside of that. And that sustained and supported me. Where it really gets to be terrible is when you get into the professoriate, and and that's where things can get sticky. And I will say I had an amazing postdoctoral experience. I just got into the right group with the right person at the right time, and those are my people, my friends. But I give a credit to my mentor Rick McCullough for building that environment, and I kind of wanted to duplicate that in my own lab. That he fostered that environment, and as the saying goes, right, a fish rots at the head. So if the head is actually doing it, the rest of the body will follow. And he set that culture that this is going to be inclusive, and we were. And it was a very supporting and rewarding experience. I think that fueled me to continue on after some of the mistreatment that I got. But yeah, then you become a professor, and you learn of people are getting together having lunch. You never get invited. People are doing other things. They never ask you. And this becomes a part of your experience. And so then the same thing just holds. It's like, okay, I'll just, make my own set of friends. Moving universities was challenging because you have to start all over again. You spend time building up your community, building up your network. I had a great network. And to be fair, I actually did have friends in my department at Iowa State as well, but I had a great network of friends campus-wide. I actually championed and started a Black faculty and staff organization to pull us out, because universities are siloed, and, maybe your department's not very diverse, and, but everyone's kind of that one person in their own department, to figure out a way to pull us all out and pull us all together so that we can have a community. And it's still going, even though I moved, and I'm glad they're keeping it going, because it was just such a rich source of community, that I had friends in other departments and other colleges in athletics. Athletics those guys are always a good time. But that was kind of my community. And then when I moved to Boston, I had to start all over again. And so that's the downside about this thing. But you do develop a thick skin. I will say, I have never subscribed. You often hear the thing, you have to work twice as hard to get half as far. And that, I don't propagate that at all. Like, I've heard that, and I can see that, because you never get credit for the things you do. So some people say, oh, I'm gonna work twice as hard so they'll finally recognize me for it. If you're working really hard and the people around you don't recognize who you are, find some other people to be around. That is the advice I got. And yes, I often got second guessed in my environments, but one place where I found a lot of support was with my professional society. I've always been active in the American Chemical Society. So even when I was getting second guessed and undermined and doubt in my real job, I had this large group of people behind me that were just like, really? They do this to you at your institution? Because you are amazing. And, and that was good. That was very important. But, you just have to build supports for yourself if your institution doesn't have it. And so, yeah, I moved institutions, had to start again. And now it's interesting, though, now that I'm on the other side with doing the administration, I don't feel that. I mean, I work very closely with other administrators, and we are a small group of people, but I feel very welcome and supported. And I have not, if they feel that way, they keep it to themselves, but I have never heard she only got picked to be an AD because she's Black, or they only picked her because they needed another woman. I have not heard any whisperings of that. I've heard a lot of, and maybe because I moved institutions already, so that was a big coup that they poached me from other universities. I've heard a lot of, wow, we're really lucky to have you, and you bring such a different perspective to our group. But I haven't really heard the negative underside. And so it's very refreshing, actually, to be working with a group of people and to have that feeling. So.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much. Can I ask you, in addition to this question, you mentioned during your undergrad and part of your graduate school, the outside community had supported you really well. And if I remember, you're a first generation college student. Am I correct?
I am.
How did you, for a lot of our students that are in the same situation as you were, that outside community, how do you explain for them the nature of education? How do you explain for them that sometimes you have to spend 12 hours in the library or in the lab? How do you make that connection?
Yeah, so like for my family, I was definitely a bit of an aberration, and I give a shout out to my family because they never quite, and probably don't, because our fields know exactly what I do or what's going on in my life, but they've always encouraged me to do it. Like, I don't know what you're doing, sis, but get after it. Like, if that's what does it? And I think that's the thing, is to just get rid of the details. I don't have to tell my family about the intricacies of writing a grant, or the intricacies of writing a paper, or the intricacies of doing research. But they know I have to do it. They know it's time consuming, and they know it's tedious. But the support from my family has always just been, okay, like, if that's what you have to do it. Go get after it. Like, just do your best. And so we support each other. When I was in graduate school, I lived in Washington. And so I had in close proximity, 3 of my siblings actually had also went to school and relocated. One of my sisters was in the Army, and she ended up in the Virginia, DC area. And 2 of my other siblings went to Howard, and then they ended up in the, so we all converged into DC, and for a period of time that was wonderful, because we'd have Sunday dinners, and it would be about nothing but just having dinner and food and just hanging out and just communing and just enjoying each other. And so that is a huge sort of a source of support. My brother Yaya he's the artist musician of the family, and has been my biggest supporter. Does he understand the details of what I do? No, but whatever I need, he's got my back. This man has literally moved me, physically driven a U-Haul or whatever across country for every stop in my career. He has held me down. He's like, whatever you need, sis. I'm like, well, I need you to come, drive a U-Haul from Pittsburgh to Iowa. And he's like, when, and so that's how family supports.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think you answered our next question so beautifully. Let me share my screen again. next question, student has, how did you overcome those obstacles? What drove you to persist? And what advice do you have for people who are going through the same thing?
I think how do you overcome obstacles and what drove you to persist? I'll go backwards. What drove me to persist is I'm just not a quitter. And there are times I wanted to quit, and my dad had to remind me that we're not quitters. My neighborhood in Brooklyn is known as Brownsville, like I mentioned, one of the worst neighborhoods. But the mantra was from Brownsville is we used to have a slogan to say, we don't scare easily from Brownsville, say never ran and never will. And so my dad would remind me of that, like, look, there's no quit in us. We're not people who quit. And it's like, okay. But sometimes you just have to give yourself that moment. I mean, me and my professional friends, we have this thing we call a pity party. And, when you're having sometimes some bad things happen to you and you're really having a bad day and you have to move past it, but, don't feel like you have to move past it immediately, fall apart, cry, have a drink, call up a good friend. And, don't suppress those emotions. I think we get used to feeling like we have to be stiff or we can't be emotional people. Be emotional, fall apart. And when we go through things, I got some friends I could call. They'll call me like, girl, I'm going through. I got a call like that the other day, 1 o'clock in the morning. Friend says, I saw you just commented on Facebook. I figured you were awake. You got a minute? And she just let it pour out. And I listened and I said, okay. I said, it's awful. She's like, I know. I said, it's awful. Well, get some rest. Next morning I check back. How you still doing? Still doing awful. Okay. As you should. We talked a little bit more and stuff. 48 hours later, well, a little bit more than 48 hours, because I didn't want to have the conversation at 1 o'clock in the morning. I called back. I said, okay, it's been 2 days. Wipe off your tears, put your big girl pants on. What are we going to do to move forward? And that's how we would do it. Is like, okay, let the emotions flow, get upset, be angry, be hurt, but put a clock. You can't sit in that forever, because that gets sympathy is nice. People give you little hugs, pats, condolences, but you're just stagnant and life is just passing you by. Fall apart if you need to, cry, be sad. But me and my friends laugh. We call it hosting a pity party. You upset, it's like, I'll pour the wine. You want to be pitiful? I'll listen and we'll sip. But we sit down later and say, now we strategize. How do we move past this? How do we get over this? What are the next steps? And it's ranging of situations. I had a friend just got denied tenure. It's a tough one when you're an academic. And it's like, okay, take a moment, fall apart. That's devastating. How do we move past it? And so that's what we do to support each other. And that's something that sustains me. Because I find that a lot of people try to act like things don't bother them. And you bottle all that up inside, those people usually fall apart big time later. So we're like, yep, fall apart, put a time limit on it.
Thank you. That's very practical. Next question, let me share my screen with you. Question for, how do you manage as a person of color in a field that is predominantly white men? Did you feel like you had to work to, let's see, you actually mentioned this in the previous question so beautifully. Did you feel like you had to work twice more than your colleagues to get acknowledged for your work?
So, I did touch on this earlier. And, I will say, here's the thing. When you're a person of color in a predominantly white field, for better or worse, you will stand out. My friend John and I, we coined this phrase, institutional tokenism. And we said, by virtue of your ethnicity, if you are in the minority, you are going to be treated differently for better and worse by your university. And you just have to accept that. And so, or at least expect that. And so you got to take the good. You got to take the good with the bad. There have been some bad things that have happened, like I mentioned, just othering and experiences that I have had to deal with. But then on the flip side, there are a lot of things that you do benefit when you're a person of color. I mean, I remember I have a good friend. He's a solid scientist, white male, youngish person. We were both junior in our career, solid scientist. And I just think about the number of times we went to meetings. And he was relatively just obscure to everyone who he's ran to just, oh, hi, we met at the such as me. People, oh, okay, well, it's good. Okay, good to see you. Kind of, I don't remember meeting you, and then I'm talking to people like, we met at this meeting. We met. And it's like, oh, I bet you remember meeting me, because I'm probably the only Black woman you met at that whole meeting. Like, I bet you remember meeting me. Now, the bad things, there is a handful of us. It's not zero. And I occasionally would get confused with another woman who was a couple of years older than me when I first came on the scene. People say, oh, we met. And I'm thinking, no, we didn't meet. And they were like, yeah, back when you were at UNC. And I'm like, you're talking about Valerie. And they're like, oh God. And it's like, I'm the other Black female chemist. But, and so, making people remember me was never my issue. Giving them something positive to remember me by was what I had to work on. And that had to deal with, all the biases and things I spoke to before. But I think that, for every successful person who comes through the field, they do make the path a little bit better for the person coming behind them. On the graduate admissions side of the house, which I have to deal with now, you often get people say, oh, I'm all for diversity, but not at the expense of quality. And I don't know why people think those two things are mutually exclusive, but you get that naysayer. But then when you can say, well, we have these 3 other students who are from these backgrounds, they're doing very well. And it becomes more comfortable and the barriers start to melt away. And so I do feel like, my pathway through wasn't in vain. Hopefully it makes it a little bit better. And the second part of the question said about the twice as hard. Yeah, because people discount your accomplishments. They do. You get I remember I got an NSF Career Award, which is a pretty significant accomplishment. It's viewed by a panel of scientists, but yet somehow, I had some colleagues who came to the conclusion I only got it because of my race and my gender. And it was like, wow. And then it's like, well, where's the data for that? I said, really? Because what number? Because if your logic is true, then the number of women of color who should have gotten this award should be a lot higher than what it is, if they're just giving it to us for showing up. And so, you do get that effect where people want to discount your accomplishments. You often excel. And this is kind of what sucks about academia is we have this one size fits all, or one size is preferred model to what people think is a scholar. But, people from diverse backgrounds always tend to do like a lot of other things. It's not just to put your head down and publish model. I do all this diversity and inclusion stuff. It was not in my job description, but I care about it. But when you start to have accolades and accomplishments in areas that are outside of the norm, people totally discredit and not value it. But I've long since also moved past. I tell my friends, people will never give you credit for accomplishments that they themselves can't attain. So you win an award, if it's in a category they can't compete in, all of a sudden they say it doesn't matter. Oh, that's not a significant or important award. And people always try to, it's not unique to just people of color. You go look at politicians, look everybody, people who can't do anything always try to cut those down who have. And so I just decided I'm not caring, when I say I just brush it off, easier said than done, but it becomes a burden. I remember saw a woman, she was talking about, about holding a grudge or holding on to pain. And, she had a water bottle and she held it out in front of her. And she's like, no big deal, right? Hold this water bottle in front of you. It's just a water bottle. It's no big deal. And she asked people if they were able to keep holding it while she kept lecturing. And then she kind of checked in and she's like, it's starting to get annoying, isn't it? And toward the end of the lecture, some people were really hardcore, like, I'm not going to give up. And it's like, it was light in the beginning, but it gets burdensome. And it's like, I'm not carrying other people's I'm not gonna let people put baggage on me, and I'm not gonna carry that. I got too much stuff I need to do. And it's like, they're trying to make that my baggage, but it's like, that's actually your bag. That's actually your problem. And it's your baggage. And I'm not gonna carry that. For me, one thing that was just awesome is a couple of years ago, I was appointed an ACS fellow, and that is a program with clear guidelines to who gets to be an ACS fellow. It is less than 2% of the total membership of the ACS ever gets to be a fellow. The criteria are quite clear. And you could go ahead and look and see who's done it. And it doesn't seem that they necessarily have any particular quota they're trying to fill with diversity inclusion for people who want to make that argument. And when I got my ACS fellow, I was just so proud because that the society I had worked so hard with recognized my accomplishments. But, even some of my biggest naysayers had to stop and pause and be like, I think maybe there is actually something going on with her, because not just anybody gets to be an ACS fellow. And they just have to stop and listen, at least finally acknowledge that maybe I had a little bit of something going on for myself. But man, if I had just kept sitting and waiting for other people to validate my existence, you could just sit and wait, just go do your best life, live your best life. They'll catch up.
I love how you use science to oppose those biases that, because you were a woman of color, that's why you got the award. And you were like, show me the data. But that was
show me the data.
I love that.
I had a former colleague, Victor Lynn. He was great. He got caught in he actually defended me in an argument where somebody said, oh, well, I know she's doing really well with one of these grants, but I'm sure that, she's only getting the money because of her race and her gender. And Victor said, okay, so then as long as she remains Black and female, she'll be an asset to this department. It was like, he was just kind of like, what is your point? The money spends, the money spends. Like, if you really think that's true, then she's still an asset. No. And it's just like, I thought that was great. So I got to give him a shout out. He was a good colleague.
Thank you. That's a kind of personal question. Question 5. Do you have any children? What advice do you have for students who want to start the school after age of 25 or sometimes with children?
Do it. So I don't have any children, but I don't want that to be part of the narrative. Oh, she's a successful career person, and that's why she doesn't have children. That's just the way my life kind of panned out. That wasn't a barrier. My mother used to jokingly say there's never a good time to have a kid. There's better times, but there's never a good time. And they come when they come, and you just do what you have to do. And this is in the backdrop of her explaining why I spent my early days sleeping in a drawer because they didn't even have a crib for me when I showed up. So she emptied out the bottom drawer of her dresser, put some bedding down, and voila, and there I resided until they could get me settled. If it's in your heart to have kids, have kids. I mean, don't be silly about it. Oh, I'm doing it today. Okay, don't do it today if you don't have a couple of things stabilized. But don't feel like you gotta wait till you're 35 or till you get the career. And if you look at the 10-year trajectory, the whole time in that situation is misaligned with your biological clock. And by the time you finish, even if you start undergrad at a normal time, you do 18 to 22 in undergrad, 5 more years in grad school, you're 27, you do a postdoc, you're lucky if you start a faculty job before you're 31, 6 years of tenure, 36. You're gonna wait till you get all that stable to have, to have a kid. And I look at some of my friends, and I did my undergrad at Wellesley College. Most of my classmates are women, and so the joke is, don't pay tens of thousands of dollars to do in your late 30s and early 40s what you could do for free in your 20s. That is not a lie. Fertility, I mean, you see things like people like, oh, well, Janet Jackson had a baby in her 50s. Jennifer Aniston had a baby. Don't let that is true. And plenty of women do have babies later in life, but it's a real thing with your fertility window. Like, if it's important to you have children, don't let your career close that down for you. It's heartbreaking to see the number of women who have delayed having children to learn that their fertility just plummeted in their 30s in an unpredictable way. And so, if it's in your heart, be strategic, surround yourself with good people. A good mate is nice. If you can have a good spouse, that's wonderful. They could be a, nice support and lifeline to you, but that's not always the hand anyone's dealt. Having a secondary family structure. I mentioned how close my family is. I'm an aunt of many, and I was a solid support early in their careers. My sister had her kids. I was there helping her navigate that and hold down. So get yourself a good support network if you're going to do it, because you're going to need some help. And the other thing is when I say be reasonable, be strategic. Can you have a kid and have a good career? Yes. Can you have 2 kids and have a good career? Probably. But it gets more challenging. So you probably don't want to. I had a friend who was like, I want to have 5 kids. And she got going in life and was like, I'm done with 2 kids. So just think about what you can balance. One is easier to balance than 2. I recommend 2 though. You want to at least have I have a couple of friends who are only children. I'm like, oh, you don't want to have just one child if you can avoid it. Because then not only does your child not have a sibling, but then their kids don't get any cousins or aunts. So, have 2, have at least 2 if you can squeeze it in. For the person who's over 25 and starting, I applaud you. Do it. Why not? Because people say, oh, I'm too old to start. Okay, so you're 25 and you start college. You'll be 29 when you get out. If you don't start college, are you not going to turn 29 eventually anyway? So I'm like, yeah, do it. And I think the system needs to adjust again from this one size fits all. Yeah, maybe, vet the universities that you go to and think about what makes sense for some schools have bigger commuter populations in general than others. I wouldn't necessarily want to go to a fully residential undergraduate experience at that age, unless I could also fully participate. I mean, if you don't have children or family ties and you can move and live on campus, do it. But, you know, if you already have your family and you're going to school, then maybe pick a school that's got more of a commuter present and is more aligned with that. But absolutely do it. The time is going to move on. You're going to get older anyway. So you may as well be the older person with the education, because it's becoming obvious that the jobs, you know, the education level that you need to get good jobs, it's hard to get a good job without a college degree these days. So you know, do it. I'm a huge fan of non-traditional age students at the graduate level. I think they in addition to just the basic perspectives that any student brings, that lived experience factor is really good at navigating obstacles. I find like a lot of younger students who came, you know, I actually get scared of 4.0 students because they have perfect everything. And then they get to graduate school where things start to get tricky and nothing's ever gone wrong in their life. And you don't know how they're going to handle it. So, you you get that person who has actually some lived experiences and they're going to be like, oh, yep. And when they know how to pick themselves back up and keep moving when things go wrong. And I admire that. I think I said this in the written thing, grit is a very important, perseverance is a very important characteristic towards success. So I admire non-traditional age students. I mean, I won't put the specifics on blast, but I actually have had a graduate student who was older than me. So I wholeheartedly respect that.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much. Next question. Let me share my screen. In one of your interviews, you talked about your childhood experiences in a science camp and how you brought the periodic table home and told your mom that you want to be a chemist. What advice do you have for parents nowadays?
And parents nowadays have so many more tools. Minimize the amount of nonsense time your children have and expose them to any and everything, because you just don't know what's going to stick. And that's okay. That's the plan right now. Just show them everything, bits and pieces, and then you'll start to see what they gravitate toward. I made my nephew watch the Nova special. My younger nephew. Well, he actually was on. He had been delinquent on his homework, so he got himself put on punishment for like no video games, no digital media, no TV, because he was on this punishment for not doing his homework. And so I said to my brother, I said, well, I know he's on punishment, but he could watch Nova, right? Is that? And then my brother said, you know what? Yes, even though he's on digital punishment, he can watch Nova. That's not just for fun. And he watched the episode and he actually enjoyed it. And then he asked to watch more, because I think he was like, I'd rather watch Nova than no television at all. And he was all in. But then he came away from that and he started asking questions. And that was what resonated with him. He had a lot of questions about the explosives. But, show your kids everything, because you just never know what might stick for them. I mean, I think parents always kind of think about, oh, I'll try them in sport. Maybe I'll try them in something, like dance or something artsy, creative. That's true. But, show them chemistry, show them physics, show them mechanical engineering. You'd be surprised what might stick.
Thank you very much.
And even if you don't understand it, Google it. You could be. It's like that. I love that Alexa commercial where the dad is like, Alexa, what year did Pompeii? Yeah, because even if you don't know as a parent, you could be reading a few pages ahead. Took me years to realize my mother didn't know half the things she talked to us about.
Thank you. Some of our student population have been disproportionately impacted by lack of equity and diversity in higher education or from historically marginalized communities. In one of your interviews, you mentioned the importance of having people who resonate with minority students. As a scientist, as an educator, as a scholar, how do you suggest we can bring diversity into the STEM field?
Absolutely. I think I mentioned that representation matters because visibility matters. I mean, when you don't see anybody who looks like you doing a certain career, your brain just starts to ask questions like, why is this? And you start, and it kind of undercuts your thought about whether or not you belong in that community. And so that's why, the lack of visibility, I think, is certainly something that has contributed. In terms of minoritized United States is great at pointing a finger And these things do kind of run hand in hand at race, and race is a big factor of it, certainly in terms of bias and discrimination. But the economics, the socioeconomic side of the piece, it goes hand in hand with it. And a lot of practices around race have created the environment we live in. And so just lack of access. It's very hard to get into one of the best schools when you went to one of the worst school districts. And so we almost immediately undercut a certain percentage of students at the knees by just putting them into crappy, elementary schools, and and stifling their opportunities there, and then it just propagates. So I think that's kind of how we ended up where we are. And then there's other things that happen along the way where they call the quote pipeline, where people exit and do different things. I think we just need a bunch of interventions at a bunch of different levels, both to steer, to give people access, to give people opportunities, give people resources who have the desire and interest in STEM, ways to bring people back in. People exit, but okay, maybe you were interested. It breaks my heart when I see a little girl say, "Oh, I thought about chemistry, but I'm not good at science." I had a girl say this. I was presenting to some kids, and she said, "How old are you?" She said, 12. I said, "You're 12. It's too old. It's too early to call it. Like, you can't say you're not good at anything at 12. You're not even the person you're going to become." And so to think about different interventions around the way to get the students who are interested, the resources and the tools to succeed, to get the students who didn't even think about it, get them in front of them and to think about how they may, get involved, and to get the students who stopped and started and hit an obstacle and exited the fields. Like, how do we get those kids back in? Because they wanted to do it. When a person makes it all the way to the collegiate level to major in something in STEM, and then, drops it midway through and switches to history or something happened to that person. And we need to figure out why. And often what happened to that person is it's financial. It's financial. And I point that out, like we at BU, we have these wonderful scholarships for our students, but it's a 4-year it's a full ride, but it's a 4-year scholarship. And what happens is you get to that second year, you fail a core class, or you have to withdraw so you don't get a bad grade. And you think about that you either have to pay extra tuition and take it in summer school, or an overbase, an overload, or a credit, or be there an extra semester. And the math just doesn't suggest you do that. So you drop down into a lower credit humanities major and just get out in 4 years with a degree, even if it isn't the one you want. And I think we need to find ways to, recoup those students and find interventions to help students who may have had a misstumble along their way, not sabotage their whole academic career. Get students who exited out into graduate school and so on and so forth. And my personal favorite, converting students. I actually was having a great conversation with a colleague in computer science. Convert students who didn't major in something in undergrad and get them the kind of a boot camp kind of or post-bac experience to get them ready to re-enter the workplace. And CS is actually a good field for that, because any student who actually finishes a CS major is probably going to get a great job right away and doesn't want to necessarily go on to graduate school or do the advanced things. But maybe we could get that person who ended up doing another major that was pretty CS heavy to realize that, oh, maybe I didn't think about majoring in computer science per se, but I like, especially with this big data initiatives, actually is what's driving it. But to say, oh, I wanted to really do sociology research, but man, I have all this data I have to manage. And to say, oh, have you thought about doing big data? And so, yeah, to just think about ways to just reintegrate people every step of the way.
Thank you. Two more questions. Was research something you always wanted to pursue, or did you find your passion for it by going down many paths?
Twisty and turn, lots of twisty paths. Early in, I mean, again, because you don't even know how to formulate the question. I just knew I liked science. I didn't know what that involved. So I just I'll do science. And then when I got going, I was steered toward med school because my professors were like, you're good in science, you could do med school. My classmates were just envious at my chemistry grades, going, oh man, she's rocking high grades. She could you're going to get into every med school you apply to. And I thought, oh, that's nice. And then I kind of got going and I was like, I don't actually want to do medicine. And I started thinking about what my options were. And my chemistry professor said, oh, just do chemistry. And I said, well, I love chemistry, but my dad really has his heart set on having a doctor in the family. Again, the things you don't know. My professor was like, if you get a PhD, you're still a doctor. I was like, really? Well, I was like, oh, okay. I actually thought they were different things because you see some people write their name, comma, PhD. And I'm like, oh, okay. I thought I just end up, it was like, comma, PhD. She's like, you're a doctor. And I was like, oh, problem solved. And then I did start doing my PhD, did research. But then even then, I said I didn't want to go to industry, but I considered it. I did some interviews and looked into that and figured out what industrial research was about and didn't think it fit for me. Thought about teaching at a 4-year institution, did a 1-year visiting position out of school, figured out it wasn't for me. And then became a professor, and that's good. There's no, you don't have to get it right you don't have to get it right on the first try. It's good to test things out before you commit.
Thank you. And our last question, thank you for being so patient with us. One of the groundbreaking research areas your lab is conducting focuses on organic semiconductor, which are the most fundamental unit of integrated circuits and computer chips. When one hears the word semiconductor, they remember Silicon Valley. How do you see your invention and discovery impact the future of chips industry in the world?
So it's not surprising. That's a great correlation. Indeed, when most people think semiconductor, they think of Silicon Valley and chips. The work we do semiconductors actually do a lot more things than microchips, but that is the main thing that people are visible. And I just bring that up to say that our work is actually not going to influence microchips. That's probably the one field that we're not influential in. And organic semiconductors are going to be more going into newer opportunities where conventional materials like silicon don't work well for us. So another good application for silicon is solar energy conversion. The solar cells that you see are made from their silicon as well. And silicon is brittle. It's in terms of how you fabricate chips from it. You'll see that there's a significant amount of mechanical architecture around a solar panel, and they're kind of these big flat monstrosities. But organic materials can actually be fabricated using simpler techniques and approaches. So we can actually make flexible and transparent devices. So I think we have real applications in more integrated solar energy conversion. So for example, you can make an organic thin film. And if you think about, I could point to your car as an example, I'm from the East Coast. I know we were always limited in how much tint we were allowed to have on our car windows, but tinting your car windows can make it look cool. Well, you can imagine that a transparent organic film is going to add a layer of tint, discoloration to the glass, but it's still transparent light and you can still see through it. So you can imagine you can coat windows with an organic semiconductor. And on the edges, you'll have to put all the relevant electronics, but you could use it and make a device that will capture the light that's coming into a room and convert it into electricity. And that's something you couldn't do readily with silicon. And so that's kind of where my materials will impact. I think we can make some contributions on the solar side of solar energy conversion. And then the other thing people take for granted are our displays, that there's a lot of semiconducting materials used in display technologies. And that's the other part where organics can play a huge role in materials.
Thank you very much for taking our questions. We really appreciate your time and sharing your personal experiences with us, and I love how tangible your experiences were. I think a lot of what you share is what a lot of our students are going through. And this month and last month, this month it was the Women's History Month. MiraCosta is celebrating the Women's History Month, and we just concluded the Black History Month. And what you share, your life experiences, I think resonate with a lot of our students. And I think it shows how STEM or STEAM, including arts, or STEAM, if you include other disciplines, can be a very diverse and very inclusive field. Any other comment? Any last comment?
Well, it's funny you mentioned STEAM, and that's actually an important thing. A lot of people don't know, and I think someone asked a question about parents. Also, put your kids in the arts. There's some nice data that shows a correlation that early aptitude in music translates to ability in science and math. So don't be afraid to, if you, in the absence of figuring anything else out, stick an instrument in their hand and let them have that.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jeffries and Dr. Malika. We appreciate your time, and I want to take this opportunity to thank MiraCosta Success in the STEM team, Amy, Louisa, Joy. If you don't mind, I'm going to share the screen. So their name is mentioned. Amy, Louisa, Joy, Teresa, Alexandria, Mike, Nina, MCCS student Garrick, Isaiah, David, Crystal, JD, Andrew, Christina, Alexandria, Aiden, and many, many others who contributed to today's session. And this is being recorded and will be shared on YouTube. Thank you very much. We appreciate you, and hopefully
you're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
Of course,
Great to see you.
Yes.
Alrighty, good to see you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Take care.
Let me stop the recording.